Hey everybody, welcome back to Freedom Empowered. On today's episode, Mason is going to interview Stephen Kumashiro and Max Kumashiro, both firefighters, one wildland, one structure, both doing things that they love to do. I hope you guys enjoy the episode.
Welcome back to another episode of Freedom Empowered with your guests, Mason and Nick. We actually have some special guests today. If you guys remember a couple episodes ago, it might have been more like 10, 20 episodes ago, we had my dad on the podcast and he talked a little bit about his career as a firefighter. For this one, we are going to also bring in my brother and his girlfriend. They are both Wildland forest firefighters. They just got back from a season in Northern California. And one of the reasons why this episode is going to be interesting is because we like to talk about things that are modern and bring in how things apply in real life. And all of these people that are with us today have experienced the recent forest firefighters firsthand. And hopefully they can give us a little bit of insight on how it, applies to our lives and what we can do better in the future. Isn't that right, guys?
Absolutely. That's what it's all about. Improving.
Yep. But I guess the first thing we'll start off with is, as we mentioned, my dad is a structure firefighter, whereas my brother is a wildland firefighter. So what is the major difference between structure and forest firefighting?
So I'd say the major difference is the places the terrains that each individual would work in. So, for instance, a Wildland Type 3 fire engine has special off-road tires and is built in such a way that it can go off on dirt roads that may have rougher terrain, steeper terrain, loose terrain, and they can get there to where the Wildland fire started. Let's say lightning hit the top of a peak. If there's a road that gets to it, it's not going to be a paved road. And it might not even be a road, but you still have to get there or get as close as you can because after you drive, you have to hike. And so you have special engines built for that, whereas a Type 1 structure engine cannot go off a paved road. So if there was a wildland fire, the structure engine would be useless. Whereas if there was a structure fire, the wildland engine would be useless because wildland engines don't have the same kind of pumps, the same kind of hose, just the same overall equipment to tackle that kind of emergency incident. I would say that's the basic thing. Obviously, there's different modules within the wildland fire profession that you could be on, not just engines. There's hotshot crews, there's helicopters, there's smoke jumpers, and then various other things. And in the structure side, there's paramedics, there's people that work on trucks, there's people that work on engines, and many other things. But I'd say that's the main difference between the two.
Yeah, since I've been on the fire department, I've been told that structure firefighting and wildland firefighting are very different. And the main difference is structure firefighting is going to be like a box. Picture a box, and for the most part, this is just generalization, but for the most part, if that box catches on fire and we don't get there, then that box is just going to burn to the ground and it's going to run out of fuel. Whereas in wildland firefighting, the fuel is almost endless. So if the firefighters don't get to that wildland fire, it'll keep burning until it reaches the ocean or out of fuel. So it could definitely be a much larger incident if we're talking about wildland firefighting. Obviously, there's some exceptions. I mean, if you have a densely populated urban area and the firefighters don't get there, obviously you could have a structure conflagration. But for the most part, wildland fires, they just keep burning because there's an endless supply of fuel. And structure firefighting is more about like if you picture a box, and once that box burns to the ground, then
Yeah.
the fire will go out.
So here's my question. We'll get back to that in a second, Max. But one of my questions is, I've talked to you before, and you've said that a blaze in a forest fire can move up to 30 miles per hour or whatnot. And when you see that these trees, a lot of them could be redwoods or other massive trees, that they can burn up in a matter of seconds. So when you're talking about structure firefighting, it seems like water can put them out, and you have a decent chance of eliminating this fire. But how do you put out, or in other words, like what do you do to fight a forest fire? Because it seems like water doesn't have a huge effect on it.
Yeah, there was a lot of fires recently that were kind of notorious in Southern California. Over the past few years, they've been getting worse and worse. And you're right about the speed of progression that these fires can have. In Malibu, there's this place called Point Doom, which was a beautiful, beautiful peninsula that reached off into the Pacific Ocean that had $1 million houses, people that had, worked their whole lives to be where they're at. And when the fire started, at one point, the fire was spreading at 8 football fields a minute. 8 football fields a minute. There's nobody can run fast enough to get out of the way, and drive fast enough. Well, how are you going to drive when there's, thousands of people evacuating, bumper to bumper traffic stuck in the middle of the road? It's very difficult. And I think you brought up a good point. One of the main differences between wildland firefighting and structure firefighting is that because of the high risk to life in a structure fire, because obviously people live in these structures, people work in them, the chances that there could be life at risk is much higher. And so you have to be able to put that fire out as quickly as you possibly can in order to save life. I mean, say you respond to the fire and it takes 5 minutes to get there. Well, that house could already be fully involved, and there could be someone unconscious in a back room, and you have to be able to get there and put it out as quickly as possible. So that's why there's fire hydrants that are mandated to be a certain amount per street, a certain distance from a business. I don't know all the regulations, but they have that. Whereas a wildland fire, if it's in the middle of a forest and there's no lakes or rivers nearby, all the water you want to use has to be brought to that location, which could be a multiple hour turnaround for an engine to get from the fire where the water is being pumped from the source or from the engine to the fire. It could be hours from that place to the turnaround where you're going to fill up the engine with new water to go back and pump the hose lay.
So is that where like these helicopters and these airplanes come in? Talk to me a little about that. What?
Yes and no. It's very hard to you can't completely put out a wildland fire with helicopters and aircraft, air tankers. Air tankers drop they drop fire retardant, but they're very important and crucial to slowing down the fire. So every time that there is a dispatch in Region 5, which is California, every time there's a dispatch, there's a certain amount of resources that are immediately sent out to this incident, regardless of the size, regardless of how the risk to life, the risk to structures, because California has so many people living there. There's pretty much no forest, no area so remote that there's not going to be a house that someone is living in. And so just so that we can lower that risk and get work put in on that fire as quickly as possible, immediate dispatch is going to include, it could be a couple engines, a couple crews, and a couple VLATs or air tankers right off the bat. The Region 5 doesn't mess around because there's just too much risk to life and property.
Here's I got an interesting question here. So I feel like you kind of have a double-edged sword going on here, because on one end you have these helicopters with these buckets taking this water and putting out these fires, but on the other end you're also dooming thousands of fish to their death that are stuck inside these buckets. Isn't that kind of like, how do you balance the life of these fish with putting out the fire?
As you
Fish,
know,
real quick, I just want to say that fish are good for eating. So if they weren't going to be caught and dumped on the fire, then they'd be eaten anyway.
Fish have souls.
No, they don't. Uh,
Oh.
Regarding the fires that happened in northern and southern California this year, it was a red flag alert, which means that there's high fire risk. It was hot, dry, and windy. And I know in Southern California, when the fire started, dozens of engines were dispatched immediately, and people kind of think like, you have all these fire engines around. How come it was so devastating? And what they don't realize is that a winter fire, it's really tough to extinguish it in those first few hours. And so going back to helicopters, what helicopters do is, I think in both northern and southern California, I know in Southern California we have very aggressive air attack, and even though the helicopters couldn't extinguish the fires, what a tactic we use is we flank the fires with aircraft, and we keep hitting the sides of the fire to keep the fire as narrow as possible, and that way the pathway of the fires is less destructive because there's not as many acres being burned by the time it reaches the ocean.
Exactly. So air tankers, they drop fire retardant, and so that's not something that's going to completely extinguish a fire. That's something that's meant to slow down the fire. So say the Wildland fire starts and it's starting to move towards a city. Well, the air tankers can lay down a bunch of water or retardant in the path of that fire to slow it down, to give time for the boots on the ground to do what they need to do to extinguish it, because ultimately it's only the boots on the ground that can finish the job. It's only the boots on the ground that can extinguish that fire to its completion, to where there's no more risk of spread. There's a lot involved. There's not just, putting in hose, and there's not just helicopters and aircraft, but you have to mop up everything. You have to extinguish every possible signs of life of that fire. Just like in structure firefighting, after you put out a house fire, there's this thing called overhaul, where you have to go through and tear apart any parts of the house, the ceiling, the walls, that could possibly hold an ember. Because once you leave the scene, if there's even a single ember left, that house could re-spark. And then from there, it could spread to other houses. And that's not something that any fire department wants to have their reputation.
Well, let me ask you this question. So I think a lot of people that are listening, especially if they're not, from California, they're probably wondering how come there's fires every single year, because I know that I read that it was something like a couple 100,000 acres are burning up. So if that's the case every year, how is there still, obviously trees can be hundreds of years old, so how is there continuously new brush to burn, new trees to burn? Like, doesn't it ever just take a couple of years for it to regenerate? Like, how come we can't have 1 year without a forest fires, and what I'm sure a lot of people are thinking?
Because there's millions and millions of acres of forests across our country. We are very lucky that we have such a beautiful country with so much different terrain, but the thing is, if a fire starts in one place and you put it out, well, maybe that place has now lower fuel loading, and the chances of an intense fire there the next year is slim to none. But
how about
right outside that fire, the fuel loading is still just as high. And so I think also
California in particular.
Let me point out that you made a big understatement. You said that hundreds of thousands of acres a year burn up. Well, that's an understatement. That's the understatement of the day. The biggest fire in California state history last year was the Thomas Fire. It started in Southern California and in the end of October, November, and that fire set the record for the largest fire in California history at over 200,000 acres. So I think it was something around 250. And that fire was particularly devastating because of all the houses down there. There was thousands of structures that burned up. That's millions and millions of dollars in property. However, this year the record was broken, but it wasn't just broken; it was absolutely demolished. There was two fires in the Mendocino National Forest, and when they burnt into each other. And they became the Mendocino Complex, which basically means there's multiple fires and now considered the same incident because they have merged close enough to where the same incident command team will be making the decisions for how tactics are going to be used to suppress this fire. And that fire got over 400,000 acres. 400,000 acres. So for whatever reason, the fires in our country are getting worse. They're burning hotter, they're spreading faster, they're causing more damage, they're more uncontrollable, unpredictable, and it's making the jobs of our firefighters across the country much more difficult. And there's countless factors.
What do you do to prevent? What do you do to prevent these type of fires?
So prevention would include, obviously, you have to educate the public. Public education is huge. A lot of fires are started because cars are dragging a chain or something like that starts causing sparks to be thrown into the brush, and then you have a fire start. Or obviously you've all heard the classic example of throwing a cigarette down
Smokey the Bear.
Exactly. So I think public education is one of the most important things. However, there's proactive things that wildland firefighters do every year, such as prescribed burns. So to decrease that fuel loading, the amount of fuels that could possibly burn in a fire, wildland firefighters create their own fires. They fight fire with fire. And basically, you're going to put a line around a specific area that has a high probability of burning, or that, is just a bad location for a fire to start because maybe there's structures nearby, and you're going to light your own fire in a controlled, safe, and planned way to where you can make that area much more safe and much more less likely to be the next site of a disaster. However, it's just not possible to do that to enough forest to where you could decrease that chance of wildland fires to where it would be manageable.
What's this whole thing with the private firefighters? I know I was reading there was a lot of outrage on the news about the Kardashians or whatever hiring some private firefighters to protect their house in particular. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how true that is. Maybe it's true, maybe it wasn't. But from what I understand, insurance companies that insure these, multi-million-dollar homes,
They got bailed out.
What they do is they would hire private fire companies to specifically go to these individual homes, to protect their investment, which I don't really have a problem with, just as long as they don't get in our way.
Do they have like better technology?
No.
What is the future, or like even what's the future of firefighting? Do you foresee some sort of technology like in the firefighting community? I guess that's something we're talking about. That's like a big thing we talk about on this show is about the future and, what does it look like and how do you progress? So what does the future of firefighting look like?
Well, obviously, we're not going to be able to change the weather. We're not going to be able to make it rain more and have greener brush. Obviously, we're not going to be able to get rid of the fuel, the wind. But what we can do is make people or encourage people to build their homes with fire-resistant materials. That's something my department's real big on. If you're going to build a fire in a certain area that has a high fire risk, it has to be not only made out of non-combustible materials, but also the landscaping around that structure needs to be fire-resistant plants and whatnot. But also, I think a major thing is we got to make sure we have adequate funding to maintain our manpower, especially during the fire season, and have the best equipment as far as helicopters and other aircraft and fire engines, so that we can keep these fires as small as possible.
I think you're talking about the future of firefighting. There was actually a huge change that happened not too long ago, and it actually started in Southern California. One of the hardest things when putting out a wildland fire in particular, because of the size of the incident, you could have thousands of different firefighters from all over the country, from different organizations, CAL FIRE, city municipal departments, federal firefighters, etc. Sometimes firefighters even brought from other countries like Australia or New Zealand, or if they really need them, they'll summon up some National Guard folks and give them a Pulaski and tell them to start swinging, because you need so many people to do every little task that is needed to put out these fires. And so organizing those people and getting them on the same page, having them all understand protocol, making sure their gear is compatible with each other so that they can effectively work as a team, that is the hardest thing. Bringing people from different cultures and different backgrounds together, united to face a common goal. And so that was a real problem for a long time, not just for fires, but for managing any emergency situation, whether it be an earthquake or a tsunami or a fire, whatever it might be. And so they invented something called the incident command system. And the incident command system was basically a structured system where you could organize people into the specific tasks that they're going to need to be, whether it be fire suppression, operations, whether it be finance. You need people to make sure that these firefighters are getting paid. You need to make sure that all the money is being handled correctly on these fires, because some of these fires are costing hundreds of millions of dollars. You got to make sure that everything is being used efficiently. There's also logistics, making sure that you have food and water and some extra supplies needed to fight these fires given out at these incidents. There's just so much that goes into it, and the incident command system made a very good, a straightforward, universal system for all emergency services that are trying to work together to help the people in our country that need help.
That's kind of interesting. It kind of reminds me of back in the early 2000s when we were going through our war crisis and going through like 9/11 and things like that, how they were talking about how federal agencies refuse to work together. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize, is that, even though we're all on the same team or in the same country or whatnot, everyone doesn't work together. And that's why, like, we talk about building connections is one of the most important things you can do to be successful, because, especially when you start talking about higher level success, or if you start talking about bigger businesses or bigger organizations like this, even though everyone carries the same title firefighter, there's like a lot of different techniques, a lot of different like miscommunications that can go on, and especially when you're trying to combine your efforts on such a large thing like a forest fire, how do you communicate? And that's like, a lot of people just think, well, you put water on the fire, but there's a lot that people don't think about that goes into it.
Yep. I'd say another thing that's really important is recruitment. At the end of the day, the way you put out these fires is having men on the grounds, men and women on the grounds, working hard, doing what needs to be done in these risky situations to put the fire out. It's a hard job. Not everyone wants to do it. And you need quality people. You need people that can be trusted, people that are willing to work hard, work as a team, communicate effectively in order to get the job done. And that's difficult when a lot of people, they don't even understand the first thing about wildland fires, let alone are they thinking about going out and joining the cause. And so I think that recruitment, especially for wildland fire, needs to be improved in every way. Right now, currently, the federal minimum wage is less than what the California minimum wage is going to be in the next coming years. I don't know, I'm sure you guys are aware, but California passed a bill where the minimum wage is going to, over the next few years, be raised up to $15 an hour. That means that if you're flipping burgers in McDonald's, you will be making $15 an hour, while there could be an adult who has a family and children working as a wildland firefighter, highly trained, highly professional, and extremely motivated, but they will be making less money per hour than someone flipping burgers. And that's tough, because a lot of these people that go out to work to go fight these wildland fires, they're seasonal employees. They get hired on at the beginning of fire season, maybe usually around April, May, and they work until fire season ends, which is usually when most places when snow gets on the ground, or when the rainy season comes, or when things start getting colder and the fire potential is less. And then thousands of firefighters, wildland firefighters, are laid off every year. It makes sense because you don't need these people in places where there's snow all over the place. But at the same time, in California, there might be snow in Northern California, but in Southern California, it's always fire season. It could be the middle of December. Some of the worst fires happen in the middle of December, and so recruitment is a big deal. And it's very hard to convince a young man or woman to go leave their home and go out into some new place, usually pretty remote, out in the woods, and go risk their life to do a very, very arduous job when they could be making more money flipping burgers with their friends and family around, having fun wherever they're
What do
from.
we think? Let me stop you there. It sounds like you're talking about like maybe some future challenges that are going to be faced in the wildland forest fire community. So my question is like,
Yes.
well, we're all about solutions on this show. What do we do? I mean, obviously California already passed that tax.
Yeah, so-
what do we do, or pass the wage increase? What do we do to prevent? Because I almost see like a military type of like connection here, where like let me finish, Max, and then you can go. It's just like when in like the military, there's a lot of people who like they get paid less, but also you're talking about how there's not fires in a lot of places, but there's also not wars all the time going on. I mean, there has been in recent years we've been fighting wars. That's a whole nother conversation, but there's a definite connection here. So you have to be prepared for these fires even when they're not in existence. So I guess what is your solution to increasing like not only recruitment but also just the level of skill and the level of caliber of like people to join? And I honestly, this is the first time I'm hearing this, because from what I've understood up till now is that being a wildland forest fighter was actually a pretty good job, and it also creates like a lot of opportunity, especially when you're talking about freedom and power principles, because you get to go and enjoy yourself in the outdoors. You get paid well, you get decent benefits, and then at the same time, it's an interesting job that you actually enjoy going to work, and versus something where you're just trading your time directly for money. So what exactly is the problem here, and then what do you think the solution is?
Yeah, of course, Mason. Don't get me wrong. Wildland firefighting is the best job in the world. I love it, and everybody I work with loves it.
Well, it's your personal definition of freedom.
It is my personal definition, but by your standards of freedom empowered, being a wildland firefighter, yeah, you might not get paid the greatest when you're first starting out, but you can get when you get a permanent job and you say you work hard, you educate yourself, you take care of business, and you move up in rank, your pay will increase. Your pay will increase, and eventually, you can of course live comfortably. Especially if you're out in some of these more remote places. I think that one of the major disservices that our country is doing to our veterans is not exposing them to this possibility of being a wildland firefighter, because a lot of these wildland firefighter jobs are federal jobs, just like the military is a federal job, and so you have to go through a lot of the same processes to get hired, to get involved, and so you're already in the system. You went through a federal background check, you got fingerprinted, etc., etc. So military veterans are the most desired candidates for wildland firefighter jobs, because they're so easily transferred from that job over to the job of wildland firefighter. So let's say you want to work for the Forest Service, which is a federal agency. It's the Forest Service is under the Department of Agriculture, and that's a federal agency. And so if you spend, let's say, 10 years in the Army, 10 years, and you decide you want to get out, you decide maybe you want a change of life, you want to see other things, or whatever it might be, so it's time for a change. If you go get hired as a permanent wildland firefighter, you can actually transfer the years spent, those 10 years spent in the military, over towards your retirement plan in the Forest Service. Yes, you have to pay back some money, and there's these other steps that you must take, and I'm not privy to all of them because I'm not. But it's very easy for veterans to get hired for as a wildland firefighter, and more importantly, veterans someone who's been working as part of a team, a highly professional, highly motivated team, someone who's been doing something that gives their life meaning, makes them feel like they're doing something for the greater good, something where they get to be outdoors, they get to be in shape as part of the job, something like the military, that has a value system that isn't found many places out there in society. Integrity, honor, honesty, these things. If somebody wants to have all that they had in the military, it's going to be hard to find that in the civilian world. But if you're a wildland firefighter, things are very similar. You're part of a team. You're working outdoors. You have to be in shape. You have to be motivated. All those things are very similar. But yet all these veterans are getting out of the military, and some of them have, PTSD, or they just are they went in at 18, so pretty much most of their adult life, they weren't part of the civilian world, they were part of the military world. And so sometimes it's hard to transfer the mentality from military over to that civilian world.
I would say, I was just going to mention it, just give you a little bit more insight on that. There's actually a lot of studies done that show that when people leave the military, they end up getting really depressed and a lot of times, become suicidal. I mean, we all know about homeless veterans and veterans that have a lot of issues. And people think that a lot of it is due to PTSD, which it is. There is a lot of things that can happen based on like traumatic things that you saw in the military. But a big part of it is that, we talk about our personal definition of freedom. And when you've developed your own definition of freedom that's based off different principles while you're in the military, a lot of times when you get out, it's hard because you're just not accustomed to that civilian life. So you're not accustomed to not, being dependent on each other in a civilian job, or not having that, that level of loyalty or connection. And a lot of people will get out of the military and then either one, get back in, or two, just end up working a job that they hate and not really being satisfied with life. And I think that this is one of those interesting opportunities that you can have to have that kind of environment that's very similar.
Yeah, exactly. I just think it's a huge disservice to these veterans, these highly motivated individuals who, have developed these core values that are so important to that of wildland firefighting. The wildland fire community wants these people, needs these people to come help out the cause, but it's just a matter of not knowing that this is a possibility. I think another huge disservice is there's not enough advertising of this career to people in the city, right?
I don't know if there's any advertising of it.
Because I grew up in the city, and at my high school, all the time we'd have a Marine stand there. They'd have their Humvee and a pull-up bar, and all the kids that thought they were tough would go do pull-ups in front of everyone and see how many they could do, maybe get a T-shirt or something, and that sticks with a young man, that sticks with somebody that has that same kind of mentality. But never once did I see anything about wildland firefighting. And for a lot of people, they might not want to take that 4-year commitment to go join the military. That's a long time. Who knows what's going to happen in 4 years? But you could sign up for a wildland fire job as a seasonal and get hired. It's only a 6-month dedication that you have to make, and after that, you'll have a good amount of money in your bank account, especially if you're a young man, 18, 19, 20. You're going to have those life lessons, those experiences in your mind forever, those slides that are going to help you to make good decisions and going to help you be a productive member of society from there on out. And if you don't like it, you never have to come back. Although I guarantee you're going to like it.
Well, that's very interesting. I was kind of thinking about that right before you stole it out of my mouth, but it's kind of true. If you don't know what you want to do with your life, and it's totally okay to not know what you want exactly, and we talk a lot about that a lot in the show, is you have to build a certain set of skills and knowledge to be able to get where you want to go. But a big part of it is you have to know where you want to go first, and if you don't, we always talk about you have to branch out and you have to try new things, and this is a perfect example. It's one of those intriguing things, at least to me. I don't know. I mean, obviously I have a different viewpoint. Like, I kind of like chaos. I kind of like challenging myself and like trying new things and like experiencing new things, especially if they're difficult, and I think that this would be a great opportunity for a lot of people. Not only, so now you have it where not only could it be massively beneficial to people that have, a service-based job, whether it's the military or some other sort of national service where you don't have easily transferable skills, but now it's also for even young kids who, maybe lack the educational prowess to be able to go to a 4-year college or just don't want to join the military, which is totally okay, and it's that's a big part of our changing society. Well, you could do something like this where you can go and be a firefighter, and think it's definitely a good option and a good benefit that we'll probably talk about more in the future, because I think that spending 6 months being a forest firefighter can teach you a lot.
Of course, yeah. One thing I wanted to add about a point we made earlier, I was talking about how the California minimum wage is going to be rising up to $15 an hour, and how there's going to be people, risking their lives fighting fires that they're getting paid less. And a problem with that, and the reason why they're able to pull that off, is because wildland firefighters, their job title isn't even considered firefighter to the federal government. It's considered a forestry technician. You get hired and you start off as a forestry technician or forestry aide, and that's basically just an excuse the government uses to not have to pay them like a city firefighter. They basically say that you're just a hard laborer and you're going to get paid as someone that doesn't have these specialized skills, which is just ludicrous, obviously, because as a wildland firefighter, the skills that you would have to have if you want to move up in the ranks and be able to teach younger men and women and share your knowledge it's endless. You can never learn even a fraction of everything you need to know. There's everything from running a chainsaw. There's task books for that where you can move up in skill and move up in your knowledge in that and prove that you're more qualified. And people do. There's different modules. You can work on an engine, and there you're going to learn everything from using pumps and putting out hose lays. You respond occasionally to medical aids. All those things. Vehicle fires, even in Region 5. Engines in Region 5, California, they now have SCBAs and structure turnouts, just the same as a city firefighter would, in case they come across a vehicle accident out there on the highway. Now, wildland firefighters aren't legally allowed to enter a structure that's fully engulfed. However, if you come across a vehicle fire on the road, and there's not a city department for miles and miles away, you're going to need to act, and so that's why they have that gear.
Is there any? Let me ask you this, not to cut you off, but I think one of the parts that why people think that forest firefighters are less skilled is that they don't play a part in the medical like structure firefighters do. Can you talk on that? Is there some sort of medical training for forest firefighters or? So,
unlike most city departments, especially in bigger cities like New York, LA, all the Portland, Seattle, the minimum requirements do include you need to have your EMT, your emergency medical technician certification. And that is not a requirement by the Forest Service. However, it is a highly desired skill set, because if you're out, let's say you've hiked in 2 hours up steep country to a very remote part of this fire, and let's say a dead tree falls and hits someone. Well, now it's the responsibility of that crew to figure out how they're going to give medical aid to their team, their family member, save their life, and get them out of this remote area to a hospital where they can get the medical treatment they need. So, for instance, I have my emergency my EMT card. So does multiple other people that I work with. It's far more common than people think. Now, it's not used as often. Structure firefighters respond to sometimes 80-90% of their calls are medical calls. Whereas a wildland firefighter, 90% of your calls are going to be straight fires. So your average wildland firefighter sees far more fire in a single year than a structure firefighter in some small town or a volunteer or even someone in a really busy city, just if they're in an area that, isn't as busy or isn't as high in terms of population or, just for whatever reason, you might not get that many fires, but you'll get a ton of medical calls because wherever there's people, there's going to be people that are sick. There's going to be elderly folks that need assistance, getting up or just various things, right? But no, being an EMT or a paramedic as a wildland firefighter is desired. Now, does everyone have it? No, but a lot of people do. And even if you don't have that certification, all fire engines, regardless of whether you're wildland structure, you're going to have medical gear there, like a trauma bag, O2, a backboard, etc., etc. You're going to have all that just in case, and it will come into play, and they are trained on this. Everyone is trained on this. They're trained on these skills just in case it happens, And so, yeah, it's a myth to say that these people aren't trained in this.
Right.
Are they as skilled as someone who responds to medical calls every day? No, not all of them are, but they are still trained. And
nice.
Yeah.
Let me touch on a different subject. Well, it's the same subject, but get a little more into it. We want to hear some personal stories here. So we keep talking about fires, all this, and everyone has seen a movie or a show about firefighting, and obviously from looking at you guys, you're not as good looking as all these firefighters in these shows. But what else is different? When you're going to a fire, what else is different? What is it like to even go into a fire?
It's not all about looks. Sometimes it's about how you carry yourself. And a man that spends all his time in the woods, cutting down trees, living like a wild man, is much different than someone who spends their time in the firehouse, sleeping on a cushy bed, taking showers, eating good food every night.
But that's true. But also, let's let the firehouse man talk a little bit on that. You've been in I'm sure, multiple fires. What is it like, and how does it conducted?
Well,
as a wildland firefighter, I can assure you that the ladies, they prefer a wild man with a beard and rugged looks than some cushy guy, clean shaven, always nice and smelling like mint. Something like that. Yeah, trust me.
Yeah, but you get paid less than a McDonald's worker, so let's let him talk.
And you smell really bad most of the time. The thing about structure firefighting that most people don't realize is the typical house fire usually only takes about 10 minutes or less to extinguish. But then after you extinguish the fire, the hard work really begins. You got to start salvage and overhaul operations, which salvage is protecting the undamaged portions of the house and belongings, and overhaul is the making sure that the fire is completely out. There's no embers that are still smoldering in there that could rekindle and create a secondary fire. And that salvage and overhaul sometimes could take hours. And when the actual extinguishment of the fire takes maybe 10 minutes. So it's the fun part is fighting the fire. The more laborious part is the salvage or an overhaul of that fire.
So what's the technique for putting out the fire? I know I've seen videos of people cutting in roofs and things like that.
It's really complicated. I don't know if I have enough time on this podcast.
Just give us the basics when you show up.
Okay, I'm going to break it down right now. Okay,
the idea of it is simple. It's going
to be a little
hazards,
people.
And
fire,
the terrain,
just water to that fire,
and the things you can't control, like weather, that really make it difficult. Because see.
Add water to the fire.
So in order to have fire, right, you have the fire triangle, right?
Let me. Just real quick.
Tell us about your fire triangle.
Tell me what it's like to go into a fire. Does the turnout gear actually protect you from fire, or do you not actually touch the fire? How does the gas
fancy
work?
You
know what I mean?
There's
just quickly, what is it like? It's obviously an adrenaline rush.
First of all, there's oxygen. The equipment's real heavy. Is necessary for when you're fully equipped. There could be combustion. Could be over 100 pounds. There has to be a heat source, which is the sparking
turnout gear,
outlet, a cigarette butt,
uses layering
or it could be
to
something more
protect you
nefarious
from
like
getting
arson.
burned. But obviously,
And
you still can
the
get burned with
tetrahedron
it.
part is
That's why when there's a legit fire, we attack it.
the chain reaction, the chemical chain reaction, which is needed to
staying low
to
because the heat
sustain
obviously
combustion.
rises.
And obviously,
Obviously,
what water does
there's
is it cools down the
potential
fire,
always for
and
or,
there's other ways to extinguish fires
flashover,
also.
which is when
Some extinguishers
everything in
they
the room
they
reaches its
they
ignition
eliminate
temperature, and the entire
oxygen.
room
Like a fire extinguisher.
Yeah,
over,
some
becomes
do.
bulk
CO2.
fire.
Yeah, but for the most part, we
the
just
air
use
mask
water
we
to cool
use-
down.
Flashover is the most
Sometimes
dangerous
foam is used.
situation a firefighter could ever
With
be.
wildland firefighting,
That was
I know
not
this
that was
because
not the
I deal with
special guy, that
wildland
was the
firefighting.
Marine guy. So
They'll
course, 'cause,
remove the fuel
I mean,
a lot of times.
wildland fire is
like
so much
cutting
more
line
dangerous than
around
a
that
fire in
fire.
every way. I mean,
And,
the unpredictability
it's
of
not
the
a
winds
wind-driven
and
fire.
the different fuels
A lot
and
of
the
times
terrain and all
that'll
the
stop the
different
fire's
different
progression.
situations you can be in. I mean,
And then
the
they'll back it
structural
up with
firefighting for the most
hose
part
lines
is
to make sure
it's
that
hard
it
work,
is
but it's
fully
fun.
extinguished.
so the wildland fire
firefighting
triangle
is mostly
is
just hard work.
fuel, weather,
No
and
fun.
topography.
Really?
Obviously,
So you're
fuel
telling
being
me
whether
you
it be
enjoy
trees,
sitting in your
grass,
little box
brush,
in the
slash,
city
you know,
with smelling that,
dead and down, whatever it might
filling
be.
your lungs.
The weather
You know,
being
listening
the
to the
wind, the
crazy crowd of
temperature,
people
the
running around.
RH.
Would you rather be in a
You
nice,
know,
serene,
someplace
forest?
if there's extremely low
Protect
RHs,
Protect that
could
nature
be-
for your children and your
doesn't have to
children's
be very
children.
hot,
running
but
up a hill,
the
running
fire
up a hill
potential
with
is very high.
50-pound pack.
Yeah, it
And
sounds
then-
hard, but that's the commitment you
Of
make.
course, topography. So
I mean, you
fire
make
is
it
going
be
to
able
want to
do
move
things that
uphill.
your
Heat
average
rises.
man can't do.
Fire,
Your average firefighter
if it is on a flat ground,
can't
it's going to
do.
much slower
And that's
than
why
it's
you.
going.
That's why wildland
let's say,
firefighters are highly
45
trained. They
degree
have a
slope.
strict
And so
PT regimen.
the most-
every morning.
The
hikes
most
and runs.
influential of
You know,
the
some people lift weights
three
here and there.
parts of the triangle,
Mostly it's
weather.
hiking and running because you have to be able to.
you could have
endure
fire on a
long
steep slope
shift.
that wants to go
You know,
uphill,
or
but if the wind is
hiking
blowing
a
downhill,
long
if you have some
distance
downward
for fire, and then
downslope
do a
winds,
full shift,
let's say in the
10 hours,
evening,
12 hours. Well, maybe I've done a
that
36
fire
hour
could actually
shift
start
before.
getting pushed downhill,
Nope.
even though
Fire starts.
naturally it wants to run
Up to
uphill.
town.
So weather
Well,
is
you're gonna
the
work
is
until-
the most influential factor.
until
If you
there's
have
no
wild
reason
winds,
to
the fire
leave
could be going all over the place, and that's when it's very
it sounds
dangerous. When you have
fun.
I will
when
say
you
that
have a
there's
unstable
nothing more fun
atmosphere.
than responding
When
to a
there's
structure fire. And
high
you see
winds
the-
and
that
they're
are
going
a
in
large
different
plume of
directions.
smoke,
That fire
and
is
you're
going to
gonna
be
be working
unpredictable,
that
and that's when it's
structure
really dangerous for people on the ground.
and
And then
extinguishing
you know,
it.
topography.
Yeah, probably be less than 10
if-
minutes unless it's a
if
commercial fire.
It's uphill. The fire is going to
And,
run much quicker. So
You'll
if
overhaul it for 2
let's
hours.
say the incident command
you'll
team is
go-
making a
go
plan,
home
how are we going to strategically
take a
attack this
shower.
fire? Well,
And,
if the fire is at the bottom
get ready for
of
the next
a
call.
steep incline with
Well,
high
I mean,
amounts of
it's
fuel loading,
Open hose, up a
and
hill.
you know, let's say the
for
trees
days.
are damaged, let's say by a bark
Yeah.
beetle,
I
and
guess
so
if
they're
you're
just most of
a
the
mountain
trees
man
or
with
most
a
trees in this
beard,
area are dead. You know
could be
that
fun.
fire is going to
But I
run
think for the most
very
part,
fast. So
just hard work.
the plan could
Well,
be
what it sounds
we're gonna
like
let
to
the
me
fire get
is
to the top of this
that
ridge, and we're
it's
going
all
to cut
up
off
to
the
whatever
ridge
your
by
personal
putting
definition
dozer
of freedom
line
is. And for
remove
you,
the
Max, it
fuels
seems
at
like
the top.
you like the hard
Because once
work,
the fire
whereas
gets to the
he,
top, it's going to have
you
a
know,
much
he's
more difficult
likes to
time
plan
running
on things in
downhill
life. So
than if
I
you
guess
put a line in
the
the middle
whole
of slope.
point of
Don't
this
get me
show-
wrong, easily jump that line and
Hard
continue to
work
run
across
uphill.
the board, even structure firefighters.
And so,
everybody,
and then fuels, obviously, you have to take that into
military police,
account.
everyone.
If
I mean,
you
there's
have
aspects of the job that
high
are less
levels
hard, aspects of the
of
job that are more hard.
dead
but
fuels
regardless, if you're
that
you're
are easily
out there
going to
risking your
catch
life
and burn hot
getting
and burn
down and
you know,
dirty
and spread quickly,
breathing chemicals
that's maybe
or
some
breathing
place you don't
smoke.
want to put all of your firefighters in.
It's
Let's say
extremely
that
difficult.
the topography
And it
changes.
seems like to me
you have
is
a
that
natural barrier like a
the,
river
you know,
or a lake
what we've
or something
figured out
man-made like
throughout
a
this
dirt
episode
road
is the most
or a
important
highway.
part is that
You can use
it's a
that
definite
as
option
part of the
that
line that you would use
one,
to
most people don't know
remove the
about, and
fuels
two, that there's a
around
lot
the
more
fire
to
and
it
contain
and,
it.
than most people realize.
So all
So
these
whether
things have to
it
be
is
taken
that
into
you're
account
looking for
when the plan is being
something with
made.
structure that's military related, whether you're looking for something where it's extremely physical, whether you're looking for something technical, where you're looking to just have us like continue in a service-based job that has a certain level of danger, or whether you simply like to challenge yourself intellectually and help other people, it's definitely a field that there's a million things you can do in it, and it's definitely just an option for personal definition of freedom, and it seems that both of you guys have found yours. So
For me, I gotta say, there's nothing
more fun. There's no greater excitement in life than getting that dispatch and you see that header. But you don't know whether you're going to show up and that fire's going to have a low rate of spread. Maybe it's 10 by 10 not so densely wooded area. Maybe there's some light grass, and you're gonna go out there and you're gonna put the hose around it, and it's gonna be out. Or maybe that fire is gonna be ripping. Maybe that fire is gonna be already 50 by 50 acres, and the helicopters and the air tankers are already doing work, but there's no way they're gonna catch it. They're just trying to slow it down. And when you get there and you put on that first hose pack and you start hiking up the mountain, it's about to be a long shift. But even those small fires, it's just so much fun. It's like a race against not only the fire, but it's a race against yourself. How hard can you push yourself, and for how long? For how long can you hike back and forth up this steep terrain with a 40-pound pack and then another maybe 25, 30-pound hose pack in order to get the water to completely surround the fire. It's a race against yourself. It's a race against the fire, and you never know who's going to win. But to me, there's no more adrenaline getting out there and you see that fire and you're going to go as hard and as fast as you can for as long as you can to try to slay the dragon.
I would like to say that the fires in both Northern and Southern California, they were devastating to many people. Many people lost their homes, and the Northern California fire had the highest life loss of any fire in California's history. The last I heard, it was around 90 people perished in that fire. So thoughts and prayers go to those folks, and hopefully they recover and they can move past this. This last year was really devastating.
Well, there we go, guys. You just heard from two people that are doing what they love, that are changing the world, and are every day pursuing their definition of freedom. And the whole point of the show is that one day, hopefully, you can also find yours. So whether it's something like this or whether it's something totally different, you know that every episode we're going to talk about something unique and try to push you to, one, figure out what you want to do, and two, how do you get there? So we'll probably have them on the show again because it was definitely a good conversation, and I think that, we'll have much more to add next time. Can barely get them to shut up, but thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.